A little lesson in third world electrical work. This is a food cart trailer. We're partially stripping out part of the old electrical system, putting one in that can handle more amperage. What it was here is they had a whole kitchen running on a single 20 amp fuse, and they got real creative with the plug-in, although you'll notice that part of it, I don't know if you can tell in the video or not, you notice the roasted part, right? I got into here, roasted stuff, and apparently it had bridged across to that ground. It was causing some issues, obviously. So what they did was somebody had scabbed a 220 plug onto a 120 type connection. What I'm doing is retrofitting this over to true 220, and we don't have a lot of room to put a box. So with this narrow box, what we have is this is going to act as a main. This is going to act for our 20 amp, our 220 outlets. These are a smaller style to use with some kitchen equipment. And also they use them on grow lights too. And then some smaller stuff. Now, when we talk about real code and specification, yeah, well, anyway, that's another story, folks. Okay, so anyway, what I am doing though is got to make sure we match the proper gauge wire to the proper stuff. That's going to be for our 20 amp outlets. I got a little 20 amp wire here, but I'm going to, this is the old fuse that I'm going to reuse, or the old breaker. The new stuff is all going in 15, mainly for lights, which aren't going to be that taxing. But one of the really big issues with these food cart trailers is a lot of times you're pretty limited on how much electricity you can get to it. And a lot of these people want to be able to run as much electrical as possible, because a lot of times that's included in the price of the space. But that's also, an electrical box like this is pretty much what you're going to see on a small tiny house. Okay, the small cabin tiny house, tumbleweed tiny house, stuff like that. So I'm going to do a parallel video showing why and how this would get used in a tumbleweed type house. So this is getting close to ready. As you can see, with this many circuits here, this is the umbilical that's coming in. This would get plugged into a 220, 240 type outlet. It's got its own breakers, so this acts as a main. This would act as a breaker for the 220 thing inside. And if you're doing a tumbleweed tiny house, you can maybe get away without having an 220 inside at all, but you're likely going to want to have it at some point, so I prefer to have that in there. But as you can see, with this many circuits, we filled up everything here. Okay, so this is all full. There is one way we could have done this, which is to have a separate breaker box just for the big on and off, and then feed big cables in through here, but there's no way to fuse those unless it's fused on the outside. So if we're using this type of box to bring in power, let's say from an inverter, that's what would get used. But it is possible to pre-wire these by using the coils where basically both ends go into here, and then they get coiled up next to it in a box waiting to get installed somewhere. And then your wire run's limited to 1/2 or over 1/2 of the coil, depending on which part of that pair you're going to place in the building and feed through the walls. And again, the buildings aren't that big, so you know, if you have a 50-foot coil on each pair, you know, that should reach all the way around the building. But realistically, you do it with a 25-foot coil, because as soon as you get to that first outlet, you're clipping it anyway, so you'd use other wire for the other runs.